Good evening. It is 5:45, the time set aside for an adjourned meeting of the City Council. It is a workshop. We will also take public comment tonight, but no specific vote will be taken on the issue. Madam City Clerk, if you could please call the roll call.
I would like to state for the record that Mayor Dutray has been excused and will not be in attendance at tonight's workshop. Councilmember Lopez.
Aye, or here, sorry.
Councilmember Martinez.
Here.
Councilmember Johnson.
I'm here.
And Mayor Pro Tem Rue.
Present.
Thank you.
That brings us to item number 3, council workshop presentation of community survey results pertaining to cannabis-related issues, and it will be presented by Fairbank, Maslin, Mullen, Wirtz, and Associates.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem Rue and members of the City Council, presenting this evening will be Richard Bernard from FM3, and he will be presenting the results of a cannabis issues survey that was conducted in, I believe, June and July. Richard, it's all yours, sir.
You were close.
Recording in progress.
April, May.
April, May.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem. Good evening, council members. Good evening, staff. I want to thank you for inviting me to come and present the results of your voter survey. Before I begin, I want to first thank you. This is my third opportunity to present in front of your esteemed council. You may not recall because it was pre-COVID, so it seems like a lifetime ago. And I had the opportunity there to do a presentation related to Measure L a couple of times, a baseline and a follow-up survey. And as was the case last time, I just sort of want to set my charge. So you know, I was asked to conduct the survey with no bias of intent. I have no horse in this race. And the city manager said, we just want to know what voters think on this topic. And so I said, well, I don't know if they'll be for or against it, but I will tell you what the results are after they are completed, just as I did with Measure L. And I'm happy to do that again tonight. So let's begin. So we conducted the survey between April 24th and May 16th of this year. It was a dual mode survey, which means a portion of the respondents completed the survey online and a portion of the respondents completed the survey on the telephone. It was randomly selected. We interviewed a random sample of 398 City of Montclair voters likely to vote in a November 2022 election, which is the election you're interested in at least considering. I realize there's nothing to decide tonight, but at least that was the universe. For questions asked of everyone, the margin of error is plus or minus 5.2%. We contacted folks by telephone, email, and text invitation. And where I have questions that we asked in the January 2019 and June and July 2020 survey, I will be showing you track questions so you could see if attitudes have changed or if they're consistent with what they were previously. And of course, the survey was available in both English and Spanish. And if you're very quick on math and notice something doesn't quite equal 100%, I blame that entirely on rounding error, but it will be either a 99 or a 101. All right. So let's start out. In the beginning of the survey, we wanted to get a sense of mood of the electorate. So we will begin with that question and a few perceptions. We began the survey, as we did in January 2019 and 2020, by asking them if they thought that things in the city were generally headed in the right direction or if they were off on the wrong track. The blue part of the pie is right direction, the orange is wrong track, and the gray are the folks who just volunteered. They didn't know enough. And as you could see, we have the two previous survey results in line as well, 2019, 2020, and now the 2022. So what's striking for me, other than the fact that 57% said things are headed in the right direction, is that compared to June and July of 2020, your numbers haven't statistically really changed very much. So what does that mean? Well, comparatively, since I do a lot of this for a living in a lot of Southern California cities, including some of your neighbors, these numbers are very good. If you consider in the context, now I know the city's not responsible, but when you ask people right track, wrong track these days, the numbers tend to be a lot lower than they've historically been in various cities. Why is that? Well, we have 40-year high cost of living index. We have extremely high gas prices that are really hurting most folks who depend on their car to go to work, to recreate, to take care of family and the like. And yet, in spite of all that, your numbers are still resilient. They're quite high, which to me reflects the vision that this is a well-run city. So I think that's partly a measure of that. We also asked the question that we asked in 2019 and in 2020, which is, do they even think you need additional funds to provide the level of city services that residents need and want? And there we offered them, as we have in the past, great need, some need, a little need, or no real need, or they volunteered they didn't know. And you'll notice that, again, your numbers are pretty similar to the June-July numbers of 2020 before Measure L. So in spite of the fact that your sales tax is up and therefore you have more revenue in the city, there is a perception that there still is a need. And you'll note that the perception of great need has gone up 6 points, a little above the margin of error for questions asked of everyone, this is one of them. So you have a little bit more than 3/4 who are saying great or some need for additional funds. The other questions that I'm going to pursue before we get into a simulation of the ballot question is awareness and general opinions about cannabis. To set the context, where are people now in terms of their understanding about what is allowed and not allowed in the city, as well as their opinion in general about this topic? So first, we asked them, as far as you know, is it legal to sell cannabis products in the city? You'll notice we asked this in June and July of 2020. And as you know, and as I will repeat the correct answer, that it is not. You have at this point 27%, a little bit more than a quarter, who understand that this is not legal in the city at this moment. And yet you have approximately 72% of voters who either believe incorrectly that it is legal or they volunteer that they just don't know. So there's a low perception of what the actual fact is. And you could see that there's a little bit more awareness compared to, in terms of the no answer in June and July of 2020, but nonetheless, the vast majority of people, like the last time, do not know the fact that it is not legal. Second, we asked, in general, do you support or oppose allowing businesses to sell cannabis products in Montclair? On the left-hand side was that result in 2020. 54% said they would support it, 34% they opposed, and 12% didn't have an answer. By this time, in April and May of 2022, you're up 6 points in the level of support. Opposition's up 2, and most of that has come from the don't know. So generally, everyone has an opinion, and you could see that it's a little less than a 2-to-1 ratio of support versus opposition for this issue. But I will point out the strongly support are 29, the strongly opposed are at 22. So there's very close sort of two different camps that are kind of in place in terms of support and opposition. They're just not a plurality or a majority of folks. The majority in general support the proposition. So now let's talk about the potential cannabis tax. Now, I'm not trying to get ahead of the council, but I was asked to test something, so here we go. Before we asked them about a potential tax, gross receipts tax on cannabis, we gave them a little bit of information. We thought it was important for people to understand that there is currently a ban in place before they went into this question, so that they had clarity about what the law is. So we said there's currently a citywide ban on the operation of businesses that sell cannabis products. However, the city is considering lifting the current ban and allowing for cannabis retail stores, as well as the delivery, testing, manufacturing, and cultivation of cannabis. If the city goes ahead with legalizing cannabis, it is considering placing a measure on the ballot for voters to consider in an upcoming city election. That sets the predicate for the ballot question that I'm about to present to you. And again, I know that ultimately it will be the council, if you folks choose to move forward in consultation with your legal counsel, that will decide the ballot question, but of course I have to test something. And so what I did was I worked with the city staff to get a clarity as to what you could be doing if you choose to move forward. And I identified, because it's a general purpose measure and therefore a 50+1 measure, by law, you can't promise the money goes anywhere. You'll be familiar with that from the Measure L sales tax. But I included some illustrative examples of what the money could be used for based on your general behavior from what you used the general fund money for in the past. So I would ask city manager and his staff, could you use general fund money for this? And I mirrored that with the desires of council in terms of wanting what they see as, you folks see as priority, with the priorities of what we found voters to have in the previous surveys. And we created a ballot question, and using this concept of the gross receipts tax not exceeding 10%, which would allow you to shift the percentages on your own, because it says not to exceed 10%. It's not a fixed amount. So you may decide to put it at 3%, 4%, whatever you think is appropriate. But it gives you that flexibility. And it would generate approximately $3.5 million annually. So with that in mind, if I was on the phone, I heard it. If I was online, I read it. We said, based on the description, would you vote yes in favor or no to oppose? If they said they would vote yes in favor, we asked them, is that definitely or probably yes, because we wanted to know the intensity of level of support. What percentage said definitely yes? If they said no, we asked them, is that definitely or probably no, because we want to know the intensity of the opposition. And if they're undecided, we pushed them a little. We said, well, would you lean yes or would you lean no? If they said they'd lean yes, we put them in the yes camp. If they said they'd lean no, we put them in the no camp. And then the folks, and in this case were 8% of the respondents, said, I'm just undecided. I need to know more before I tell you anything. So on the initial vote, you're at 70% yes, 23% no, and 8% undecided. And knowing that the margin of error is plus or minus 5.2, and just for simple math, let's say 5 for now, if I look at the yes and I go up 5 points, you're at 75 on the high end or 65 on the low end for a 50+1 measure on just hearing ballot summary. That's it. But now, and I want to show you one demographic slide, and then I'm going to try to show you some simulation of outreach for if the city chooses to move forward and communicate and what impact that has. And then I'm going to show you the impact of opposition statements on the measure to show you its resiliency in terms of can it sustain opponents, criticizing that. No one has control over the opposition bully pulpit. The city can just provide facts. It can't advocate, but it's important for you to know if the measure could be vulnerable. That's part of if you choose to deliberate on this issue. So the one demographic slide I want to show is, you may recall one of the earlier questions we said, does the city even need additional funds to provide the services that residents need and want? If I said great or some need, or that group that said that, which was 76%, they're at 73% in support of this measure. If they think you have a little or no real need, at best they're at pretty much an even draw in terms of support and opposition, given the margin of error, 48-42. And if they don't know, support is high, so sort of low information voters in terms of awareness of support. But this tells me the more you educate, if you perceive there's a need for additional funds, the more you educate about the need, the more likely they may be to support a measure based on these findings. So I'd also like to talk a little about your voter priorities. And I always start off this section by suggesting, as I have in the past with you folks, that even if you choose not to move forward on this particular measure, that this is an invaluable tool, because how often do you get a statistically valid survey that gives you an assessment of what your voter priorities are? And so when you're sitting down and deciding on budget priorities, you obviously make good social policy decisions, but it's nice to know what voters think as well in your deliberations. So we began this section by saying, regardless of whether you support this measure or not, how important would it be to include this item in the measure? And we gave them the option of extremely important, which is the darkest blue, very important, which is that mid-color blue, and I've aggregated the extremely or very important on the right-hand side. The lightest blue is somewhat important, and that orange, sliver of orange, are the folks who said not too important, or they didn't know enough to offer an opinion, which generally means it can't be that important. And so by aggregating extremely or very important, I want to tell you a couple of things first. First, we tested 27 items. And as we go down the list, and there are 4 slides, the bulk of the items, with the exception of 4, are above 3/4 in terms of extremely or very important. What this tells me is that, and I can tell you in many cities, sometimes I have 1 or 2 that are in the 70s and 80s. You know, you have the bulk in the 90s and 80s. This tells me that this council and the city staff are very much in line, lock, stock, and barrel with the priorities of your voters. So you're listening to them, you hear them, and it's reflected in the things we test. If they test high and their priority to the city, this tells me the voters are prioritizing the things that you think that matter in equally high numbers. So kudos to you, and it's important for you to know. So among the lead items on that first page that we're looking at are almost disproportionately all public safety issues.
May I ask one question?
Absolutely.
Why did you include about protecting water when we have no control over water? That's Monte Vista Water District.
Sure, and I remember this question being asked last time I was here, and my understanding, and I don't know if city manager is public works folks here as they were last time to explain. My understanding is you do have control over stormwater, so I'm going to perhaps let you answer.
That's not local drinking water sources. Our local drinking water source is Monte Vista Water District.
Monte Vista Water District is the purveyor of water, but the city does have a responsibility in recycled water. In agreement with Monte Vista Water District, Montclair is the lead agency as it relates to the provision of recycled water to the community. We also are responsible for making certain that there is no effluent that goes into the storm drain systems that would contaminate the main water sources that flow into the aquifer as well as into the Santa Ana River. So we do have a significant responsibility related to protecting local water resources.
I think it should have been asked about recycled water. I think this is a very difficult question, and I don't like it in there. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, may I? I was going to bring this up, but I didn't know he was going to chime in.
Yeah.
In 2020, as a resident, I also brought this up and objected to this inclusion because the city of Montclair does not provide water to its residents. And I think it's misleading. And when for all intents and purposes, the campaign materials that were prepared, or the fact sheets, I should say, that were prepared by the city, any reference to water was taken out of those materials, as it should have been. So I too am bothered by the fact that the question would even be asked, because it gives the implication that the city provides water to its residents, and it therefore blurs the lines and confuses them even further, that we are the ones that provide water when indeed we don't. They have their own separate entity, governing board, et cetera. but I am bothered by that as well.
Sure. So first, you should know that you folks are the experts on the city, and I collect information, and then I ask it based on my understanding. But I will point out one thing. If
So
you'll-
then staff asked you to ask the question?
I asked the staff if it was something that money could be used from the general fund.
So the question was included in the surveys related to Measure L. It was not excluded from that survey. We believed at the time that it
I
was.
said the
an important-
campaign materials, not the survey.
No, well, I'm saying the question was included in the survey in
Right.
relation to Measure L. It was also, I believe, part of the question that went to the voters as they considered Measure L. We feel that it's an important question because the city does have a partnership role with Monte Vista Water District. They are the purveyor of water, but the city has a major responsibility in relation to the National Pollution Discharge legislation that requires that the city, not the Monte Vista Water District, but the city be involved in protecting the cleanliness of water sources as it relates to the effluents that flow outside of our storm drain, out of our streets into our storm drain system. In addition, the city has a working relationship with IUA, as well as the Monte Vista Water District in relation to the recycling of the water and making certain that we are in a partnership with them in ensuring that grant funds are obtained and other programs are introduced to make certain that recycled water is properly introduced into the community, not as a drinking source, but as a potable water, but as a source for landscape irrigation. And in fact, as council knows, the city has fronted the cost of putting in recycled water lines throughout the community, including on Central Avenue, because Monte Vista Water District does not have the funding to install those recycled water lines. And in the next rendition of extension of improvements to Central Avenue, City of Montclair will again be installing the recycled water lines, again, because Monte Vista Water District does not have the funding. And the city will be the purveyor of recycled water through those lines because Monte Vista Water District will be unable to access those lines to provide the recycled water to the community because under the terms of the bond agreement, the city has to be the sole provider of water through those lines. And so that does make us a purveyor as well as a participant in making certain that water sources in the community are both protected and clean, and that proper use of potable versus recycled water is part of our long-term plan.
In order so that, because I hear you folks, in order to make sure that this doesn't muddy up the results of the survey, I just want to point out that water was not placed in the ballot question that we asked them. So the results of that initial ballot question do not include the issue of water. So if that's helpful for you in your analyzing the results of the question itself, the ballot question, it does not incorporate that.
Then what verbiage was used in your survey with respect to protecting local drinking water sources? Was it that exact word? Verbiage?
Yes, but yes. So I asked that clean read of a ballot question, and then, as I'm doing in terms of the presentation here, I'm now introducing various elements that could be funded by the general fund. That doesn't mean that they will. It doesn't mean that you will include it in the ballot question. It means I'm limited, as we all are, to 75 words. And I test a whole bunch of things that the money could be used for. And at the end of the day, only certain elements are placed in that 75-word ballot title and summary. So the question that I asked, that I presented to you, and that I will present the results all 3 times, does not include that water question item, but it is identified in a whole list of 27 items that I ask about in terms of how important would it be to include this in the ballot initiative. So at the end of the day, I can walk away and say, if you chose not to put it in those 75 words, your numbers will stay high because it wasn't included in the ballot question I asked throughout the survey, if that's helpful for you.
Councilmember Johnson is next.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Excuse me. I have a clarification question for Mr. Starr. about our relationship with IEUA. And my understanding is that we, like our sister cities, all pay into the infrastructure that IEUA needs to do in order for us to have clean drinking water. Am I off track on that?
No, the city, as well as all of the cities are under the IUA umbrella, participate through funding the IUA program, through the EDU, which is a fee that is established by the Board of Directors for IUA. That assessment is charged to the users of IUA services. Any new development project that comes on board has to pay a significant amount of money to IUA for each of the fixtures that they are incorporating into their building, and as well as all residential developments. Of course, they are on a per unit basis as opposed to a per fixture basis. But all residents, all development in each of the, I believe, 7 umbrella communities are part of IUA, do pay for basically the full cost of the operation of IUA, as well as the treatment of the sewer effluent that goes to IUA for treatment. Now, again, that water does go into the recyclable system so that it conserves potable water for drinking. Another way in which we are preserving and protecting potable water for drinking is that we are expanding the use of recycled water for other purposes. And then the recycled water also goes into a percolation basin where it is treated naturally through subterranean percolation until it eventually makes its way into the aquifer, where it then becomes potable water at that point. IUA also applies for grants. As you are aware, they recently received approximately $230 million grant from the state of California for the Chino Basin project, which has been discussed and presented to the City Council and other workshops. The city is currently protesting the parameters of how the Chino Basin project will work, but we are still working with IUA to develop that program.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
And my final comment on this is I think it's a rather leading and blurred question.
How so?
If I were to receive this, I would think the city had control of the drinking water sources. So when brown water comes out of my tap, I'd be calling the city, not Monte Vista, not IEUA. I don't like that question. I think it's a leading question. But what I'm going to do is the next time somebody asks me about water, I'm going to give them the direct line to the manager of IEUA and the manager of the city of Montclair, and they can give them these long convoluted questions about their drinking water. Thank you.
Great. So you'll notice in the on the first slide that the leading items are all related to public safety. And in fact, just to point out, the maintaining 911 emergency police and fire response, in the last survey we did, that follow-up survey, which was after the unfortunate circumstances in Minneapolis surrounding George Floyd, the numbers in terms of extremely and very important were quite down from there. They have since gone up on that particular item, and I thought that was worthy of note. Among the other items, we've already discussed the issue of the protecting local drinking water, but helping retain in local businesses and jobs scored 91%. And then you also see in the next slide things like repairing streets and potholes, protecting long-term financial stability, addressing homelessness. It suggests to me that you have enough items that score high that a general purpose measure would be viable, because if you only dedicate it to public safety, it becomes a dedicated measure, and by law, it's required to a 2/3. So it's just good to know sometimes cities don't have a variety of things that their voters support. You do have a variety of support in a variety of areas, which makes it very likely that a general purpose measure would be supported by your voters. So as we go down the list, and of course you have access to this because it's public information, you'll see additional elements that we've tested. But even on the third slide, you have items that on intensity, the extremely important, one being the increasing the amount of affordable housing for middle and working class families. it's at 56%, and it's on the third slide. Like, I never see this. There's such strong intensity to levels of support for many of these items. And then finally, at the bottom, the lowest ones are in the 60s, and in many cities, those might be the top ones, but just comparatively, they're among the lowest of the items here. So we gave them a list of what the money, again, could be used for. You can't promise anything because it's a general purpose measure. You can just talk about illustrative examples of money that go into the general fund and what that can be used. We then presented them with a series of educational statements. As you know, the city can't advocate, but it can educate. And we said after each one of them, and we randomized it so people, as we did the other list, by the way, we said after each one, tell me if it makes you more inclined to vote yes on the measure. If they said it does, we asked them, is that much more inclined, which is the dark blue, or somewhat more inclined, which is the bright blue? And again, I've aggregated the total more inclined on the right-hand side. And I will show you over the next two slides, you have a very compelling story to tell. Remember, it's a 50+1 general purpose measure, and you have at least 7 in 10, if not more, in all of these statements that say they would be more inclined to support the measure, having heard that statement. The items in the parentheses, the word youth, black market, nearby cities, and then on the subsequent page, won't pay accountability fair share, were not read to the respondents, nor did they read it online. That's simply here for us as a thematic device, so I don't have to read 6 messages in front of you. I'm sure you have more important things to do, and you can read them on your own. But at least you know that the youth message, which deals with the fact that this measure can help sort of maintain the after-school and summer recreational programs in which more than 3,000 of your local children and youth rely on to keep them safe and off the streets and out of trouble. And then a couple of messages related specifically to cannabis on the illegal black market cannabis creates blight and rundown areas. This measure would push out illegal businesses and replace them with well-regulated businesses that contribute their fare to city services. And also talking about how nearby cities also provide provide cannabis, and it's money that you are perhaps losing out on. So after hearing or reading these messages.
Did you have a question on that slide?
Well, I had a question on, before you went into this section, I hit my button because I did have a question on.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right, it's
Yeah.
not your fault. That's all right, Bill, no problem.
Where would you like me to go in the slides?
Well, I believe it's page 16, if I can read that
Sure.
tiny number.
Yep. Oh, you'll tell me because it's in front of you. Tell me if that's right.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Bear with me with my eyes. Maintaining youth and anti-gang programs, and then later down the second from the bottom, no, the other slide.
Oh, same
There you-
slide? Same slide?
There you go, yes, same slide.
Okay, yeah.
Maintaining youth and anti-gang programs, and then the question about maintaining gang prevention programs for at-risk youth.
Mm-hmm.
There is a significant difference in the
Intensity.
percentages, right.
Yeah.
So what is the difference in how those two
Sure.
were portrayed?
Yeah.
What's the
that-
differential?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question. Yeah. So you might.
It seems redundant, but
Yeah.
what,
Yeah.
what
So-
am I missing?
Yeah, you're spot on in terms of your question. So I'll go back to the methodology section. You'll recall that I mentioned for questions asked of everyone, the margin of error is plus or minus 5.2. Because we had so many questions, and I don't want this survey to be onerous on your voters, we took a random half the sample and asked them some questions, and a random half the sample asked them others. One of the reasons is exactly what you pointed out. I'll go back to that slide that you mentioned.
So 290 were asked one group of questions,
Yeah,
and 290 were asked.
Just on the batteries, on some of the batteries. The reason I ask that is because I have seen just the change of one word or two can change the level of support in a ballot question by 10 or 15 points. You've highlighted very quickly
11 points.
11 points on just the intensity. It makes a difference on how it's framed. And so when I'm now considering, if again, I'm not getting ahead of you, but if you said to me like, all right, we're interested in pursuing this, in a future meeting, you're not being asked that now. Having that information allows me to frame the help with the legal counsel frame that ballot question to a point that will make it more responsive to your voters. And so that's why you've right on found something that seems very similar, but you see the difference. And in other cases, makes no difference. But unless we test it with your voters, we don't know that.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Sure. Thank you for asking that and finding that. Most people just sort of glaze over a long list, so thanks for doing that. So after telling them what the money could be used for, again, illustrative examples, there's no promising anything, it's a general purpose measure, and then presenting them educational statements, we re-asked that initial ballot question that you saw earlier in the presentation. The left-hand side is just, as a reminder, was that initial vote when just hearing ballot title, a ballot summary. So that means if they got their materials today, if they were an absentee voter or they went to the polls and voted, and they were just reading it for the first time. Where are they today? They were at 70% yes, 23 no, 8% undecided. After explaining what the money could be used for and educational reasons, and frankly, you telling your story, and it's very persuasive. You were in the 70s on all of those statements that I presented. We re-asked the ballot question. Your level of support only goes up 2 points, from 70 to 72. But your definitely yes goes up 5 points. And thinking about that your threshold is 50 plus 1, to have 45% of voters saying, I'm there, I'm with you, I'm voting yes on this, is huge. We don't often have that high a number on ballot initiatives. And you'll also note the definitely no, which I typically see as a floor of about 20%, is at 15%. So in spite of the fact that you had some folks who generally oppose cannabis in the city, it was 36% who oppose it. That 36% does not mirror the opposition in this potential gross receipts tax. In other words, for some people, they may not support cannabis, but if you're legalizing it, they may say, tax it.
The 36% was from what now again? I'm sorry.
No problem. I'm a lot more familiar with this data. I'm just throwing a lot of
While
information
you're
at you.
skimming
at
through
once.
that, do you have the
Yeah.
results of Montclair's voting results on Prop, was it 47?
I do not, but I do believe that the city staff does.
67 yes, and then what was the no vote?
It was 53.1%.
Yes.
Yes.
And then no was the 47 some?
Well, no, I mean, the no was a smaller number because there were
Yeah,
people
but
who just
yeah.
didn't vote on it.
Yes, to answer your question, it was of the people who voted, the balance was the no, right? Because you only get 2 choices. In many ways, it was somewhat similar to the support level in June and July of 2020. So when I'm referring to that 36% opposition, remember I showed that question, do you support or oppose this? 36% said they opposed, 22% said strongly opposed. But when you get to that gross receipts tax, the numbers are not entirely parallel, right? And you could see that because you're now at 20% no after education. You're at 72% yes. And if you use that margin of error test I talked about, I said it was 5.2, but if just simple math 5, you're at 77 or you're at 67 on the vote. So we then introduced some oppositional statements. Oh, sorry, wait, hold on, I missed this. Oh, yeah. We introduced some oppositional statements. That included, by the way, talking about how we're at a 40-year CPI and gas prices really high, enough with the taxes. Like, it's stop. As well as testing what we hear in every government agency, not specific to you. I can't tell you I've even heard it, but I test it everywhere. Waste and mismanagement. You have enough money. If you just do right with the money, you'll be able to do all the things you want to do. Don't come to the voters. We tested all those sort of standard arguments. It's a gateway drug. Kids are going to follow and do more. And then we re-asked the ballot question again. So on the initial vote, just hearing summary, you're at 70-23. You've seen this several times. After education, what the money could be used for. as well as some educational statements about why you're doing this in the first place. You're at 7220. After critical statements, you drop 9 points on level, or it drops 9% on level of support to 63 yes, 27 no, 10% undecided. Again, that margin of error test puts you at 68 on the high end or 58 on the low end, above the general margin of error and above that 50+1 threshold that you need, that one needs to support this. Remember, opposition needs only 50%, supporters of it will need 50+1. So it tells me that there's some resilience in spite of potential opposition to this measure. And then I wanted to do one additional sort of analysis. Remember, I've asked this ballot question 3 times. If I'm someone who said definitely, probably, or lean yes all 3 times, I'm a consistent yes voter. If I said definitely, probably, or lean no all 3 times, I'm a consistent no voter. And if I've moved from yes to no, no to yes, or I'm pure undecided all the time or some of the time, I'm a swing voter, or what I call a persuadable voter. 58% of the respondents in this survey were consistently yes all 3 times. 16% were consistently no all 3 times, and you have a quarter of the folks who want to know more information before they ultimately come to some kind of decision on that initiative. So in conclusion, and I'm certainly happy to stare as long as you have questions, slightly less than 6 in 10 have a favorable view of the direction of the city. Given where we are now in terms of our economic situation in the US, in California, Southern California, I think that's a very good number, and it really reflects well on a well-run city. Perception the city needs additional funding remains high. In fact, you have 3/4 of the folks that say you need additional funds to do what you need to do, with 4 in 10 saying almost 4 in 10 saying there's a great need. That's the highest number that I've seen in your city in the 3 surveys that I've had the privilege of working on. Less than 2 in 10 are aware that it's illegal at this time to sell cannabis products, which is an important information fact in your deliberations, that most people do not know there is a ban. And overall support for the legalization of cannabis has increased since 2020. Now we're in about 6 in 10 voters who say they either strongly or somewhat support. The potential gross receipts sales tax on all forms of cannabis appears viable at this time. Remember, we informed them before we asked them the question that it is not legal. It is banned at this moment. So they know going into that question what the reality is. We're not trying to trick them in any way. We want them to have that information. But in reality, when many of these folks go to the ballot booth, unless they're really laser focused on what's going on in the city, they still may not know. You can't make people read information that you provide to them. You just hope that they do. Roughly 7 in 10 voters would vote yes on the measure, with those saying they would definitely vote yes, increasing 5 points after hearing educational statements. Then support drops when we hit the measure with oppositional statements, but it goes to 63% after hearing the critical statements and still maintains its resiliency in terms of the margin of error and above the percentages needed at 50+1 for support. Finally, high percentages of voters prioritize using funds for maintenance of public safety and responses, including police, fire, and paramedics, protecting local drinking water sources. I'm just reporting the results in terms of opinions, helping retain local businesses and jobs, and repairing streets and potholes. Maintaining city-funded youth programs to keep local kids off the streets and out of trouble, pushing black market cannabis businesses out of the city and replacing them with regulated businesses that contribute their fair share to city services are among the leading reasons to support the measure. And on that, I'm happy to answer any additional questions. Thank you.
Before we go to public comment, are there any comments from the council?
Regarding I believe some of the confusion comes in when folks are under the assumption that it is legal to sell marijuana within the city limits is because of that state proposition. Correct me if I'm wrong. Does the state proposition not, allow for an individual to grow a very small, limited number of plants on their property for, I believe, medical purposes?
I will defer to the city on that.
State law allows for each household to grow up to 6 plants for recreational and medical use. There is no restriction.
And I think that therein is where the confusion comes, where folks don't know that we have a ban and it's illegal within city borders, and therefore they're under the assumption that because the state passed this prop, that we can do this.
Clarity, despite the fact that the city has a ban, residents can still grow cannabis. That's legal for them to do.
Well, right, but the selling is what I'm getting at, because those that do have it in their backyards and are growing it, not
Okay.
all, but some, are no doubt violating local ordinance by selling it.
Right, so for further clarification, they can't sell it, but they certainly can present it to residents as a gift, and we cannot prohibit the delivery of cannabis into the community, despite the fact that the selling of cannabis is illegal in Montclair. So even though we are not currently authorized to provide the legal selling of cannabis through retail businesses established in the city of Montclair, that market has been filled by deliveries from outside the community. So residents are purchasing it through outside delivery services. If you look at a software program such as Weedmap, you can see that there are hundreds at any given time of the day, there are hundreds of delivery vehicles that are transitioning into Montclair to make deliveries. So residents are buying it, they're just not buying it from legal businesses established in Montclair. So the sales tax revenues, for example, would not be going to Montclair, they would be going to the outside communities that support the businesses that are doing the deliveries.
I totally agree, yes. The reference to pushing black market cannabis businesses out of the city and replacing them with regulated businesses, et cetera, et cetera.
Yep.
I still think that in the event that the city were to, or the voters were to allow for the taxation, business-type entities to grow, sell, whatever, distribute, cultivate marijuana, I still think you're going to have that component, that it might be minimized, but the black market will always be there. That's my opinion, and I won't, I guess until statistics prove me wrong, I just think we might be able to minimize that, kind of cut into their money and profit by making it, having a legal status here, a legal, not illegal, status here where folks can do it right with permitting, licensing, taxation. Now, here's the question that I was going to ask. Did you ask any of the voters with respect to, I think you said 10% taxation on? I think that was at the
Yeah,
beginning
let
of your
me-
presentation?
Yeah, let me show you the, this is a ballot question in front of you. This was, I mean, I don't set city policy, you should know, you know that. So I'm, testing what I understand, one of the ideas possibly being considered. What I do know is that most cities, and I've worked on a number of cannabis measures, will have a not to exceed or up to percentage. In this case, it was suggested that I test the gross receipts tax not to exceed 10%.
And that would be on top of what the state taxes, correct?
I will defer to the city on that.
Yes, that is correct.
And the state, correct me if I'm wrong, from what last I heard from those in the industry, it was possibly at 50%? Did it go up more?
No, it's a 15% excise tax, but the state is actually preparing to lower the tax to encourage the market. If I may briefly address the black market issue, however, what typically happens is that when a community legalizes the sale of cannabis in their community, it does actually have a chilling effect on the black market industry. What occurs typically is that they migrate out of the community to the surrounding communities where legalization is not permitted, simply because of the fact that the legal businesses are constantly reporting any illegal activity because it affects their profit. So they know immediately, because of the nature of the industry and the communication chain that exists, they know immediately when there is a potential illegal vendor coming to town and immediately report it to the local authorities.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Councilmember Johnson, you're next in line.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. First, I want to thank you for the report. It's always great for us to hear what the residents are thinking, and what you folks do at FM3 is greater than what any of us can do with a phone. So thank you for the work that you did on this report. I really do appreciate it. Secondly, I think that we all need to understand that cannabis is here. Whether we like it or not, it's here. So the only question is, since it's here, do we want people to pay taxes on it? If I buy a pair of socks, I have to pay retail sales tax on that. Any other product that is sold in the city, there's a tax associated that comes back to support the city and its residents. And I don't know why cannabis should be any different. And my last point, I think Mr. Starr just talked about it. The legal businesses are going to want to make the greatest profit, and they will rat out the illegal businesses. And lastly, the proposals that we have seen some years ago about the legal businesses that wanted to come here, what they showed to us did not look like the scuzzy, you don't know if you're going to get shot kind of places where, illegal business is done. These look like hotel lobbies, and they're well-run, well-managed, and it is a decent business. It's not some back alley passing of the drugs. So I would much rather have a legal business. Not that I'm a cannabis person, don't misunderstand me, that's not my deal, but I would rather have a legal business than an illegal business. That concludes my comment.
Okay, before I go to public comment, I would like to state one, in the city of Los Angeles, which has legalized marijuana, 60%, and this is from the LA Times, 60% of the businesses are illegal. Legalization hasn't stopped them. The city spends their time and effort shutting down the illegal places, which pop up again overnight. The same thing as if they had banned it. They've also found, in the city of LA, according to the LA Times, the situation is that crime increases whether it's a legal establishment or an illegal establishment. As far as paying sales tax on something, if socks were banned in the city, somebody would go somewhere else to buy them, and they could pay taxes there. Your analogy of, well, Pomona and Jurupa Valley have it, people are buying it there, their taxes are going there. I can make an argument that the city of Pomona has a Kia car dealership. So apparently we need to get one, because if you want to buy a Kia, you've got to go to Pomona. The city of Rancho Cucamonga has a store called Zara, Z-A-R-A. So using your analogy, if I want to go to Zara, my sales tax money goes there, so I better have a Zara here. So that's a specious argument to me. That's just how I look at it. And I think we need to, before my view, I can go out to the public and ask them to support something. I'm supporting a tax measure, which I don't know what the ordinance is behind it. I don't know what the enabling rules are. We have about 300 pages of something, but I don't recall we've ever voted on it. I'd like to be able to tell the voters, if we support this, that we have an ordinance in place that's going to support the workers. Even in many legal establishments in the LA area, and there was a high-profile case about 3 years ago, where a young man was working at a legal establishment. They were paying him in product. He was found out in Barstow, buried, dead. He was attacked and killed for the product. So I'd like to see we have something that does that. I think voters need to understand that too. But having said that, we do want members of the public to comment. Madam City Clerk, are there any comments from the public or any comment cards?
Okay, we have no comment cards in here, and it looks like Bruce Culp is on Zoom.
Okay. And I don't have it up here, so I don't know how to do this, but Mr. Culp, you'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you. First off, I'd like to thank Councilman Denise Johnson for brave comments. Being a council member, sometimes it's hard to speak up in favor of cannabis, and appreciate your comments on that. The other cowards there, Lopez and Councilman Rue, they make up ridiculous questions about the water as an issue that might just, might change somebody's response on a survey. That's laughable at best, but, let them have at it. It doesn't make any difference whatsoever to anybody that supports or doesn't support the cannabis proposition or whatever it is. So anyways, City of Montclair already lost out on that. Pomona has their Stilsy place. It's like a Costco for cannabis buyers. And it did, my neighbors here use it regularly, but most often it's just delivery service. You can probably get on Weed Maps right now and see maybe 5 or 6 delivery services at Paseos coming by right now if you probably looked. But, that was the opportunity. That $3.5 million you think you're going to get is already come and gone. People are using delivery services now, and if it's not already established in Montclair, then we've already lost out on that income. So, I know there's an election coming up in 2018. I read about that. People, council members that are going to be supporting cannabis will have an advantage. Those who are opposed and are up for election, I wish you the best. I think we should have it legal. Obviously, people growing plants in their backyards are not selling it. That was probably the most ridiculous statement I heard tonight. That is personal use. People who are purchasing it from, the drive-ups, Stilsy right next door at Montclair or in Pomona. And the black market is losing business out here because there is now a legal business. People that the college students and the people here want to go to a store or get it delivered from a safe place. So the black market is kind of losing out in this area, I know for sure, unless people don't have the means to get to those delivery service because they're homeless or if the prices are too high in Pomona. But that would be the only people I know that are doing the black market at this point in time. So anyways, thank you for the wonderful survey, and I hope we get it on the ballot. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. Is there anybody in the audience who would like to fill out a card and make a comment? Go ahead, sir.
Good evening, Council. My name is Mark Ramos. I'm president of United Food and Commercial Workers Local 1428. I will tell you that my union, our union, represents the workers who work at Stilsy and Pomona and also Catalyst. In total, about 130 workers, union jobs with benefits, prevailing wage or living wage, guaranteed hours. No doubt that looking at the survey that the kind of public's ability to accept the idea of legal cannabis is growing because it's here, right? It's here. Look, I think last time we sat here a couple of years ago, there was actually an illegal shop right across the street from you, right? If you all remember. And there were a proliferation of them in the area. But what Pomona has done, I think, is a model ordinance, if you look at it. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is, as a council, you will have very few opportunities in your career as an elected official where you can tell a private industry what they have to do to come to your city, right? Very few opportunities you'll ever get this chance where you can tell them, well, we want you to make sure that 30% of the jobs belong to Montclair residents. We want to make sure that proceeds from your gross receipts go back to a nonprofit or community program here in the city, like Pomona has done, right? Stilsy, as you heard, is going to make a check presentation on July 27th because their nonprofit they chose is a park in town. That park is probably going to see about $300,000 to help them rehab the park because the council shot high in their aspirations to do something that benefits the community, not just the retailers and not just the idea of taxing something. I'll tell you, 10%, way too high. Pomona's at 6%, right? 10%, what you're going to do is you're going to create an adversarial relationship with operators, and eventually those operators are going to run a ballot measure to reduce the tax or eliminate it, and then you're in another fight down the road. Most operators don't have a problem paying a local tax. The state excise tax, remember, you have a state sales tax. The excise tax on top of that is 15%. If your county has a tax, there's a tax on top of that. And then you're putting 10% on top of that, right? That's where it ends up being like 50% sometimes, right? Because the tax is so high. 6% is a good number. It works. Communities are acceptable to it. Good that it's the up to. But I would really, really encourage you, I guess what I really want to talk to you tonight about is a lot of good feedback. Your city seems receptive, the residents seem receptive to this idea, but I'm going to ask you as a council to, whatever the state has given you, right, that you have to do these things, that's a floor. Very few opportunities you're going to have the chance to really shoot high with the community benefits agreement that Pomona is doing. Maybe a car dealership, maybe you've got somebody who voluntarily is offering a check to something here in town, right? But to put it in statute that 1% of your gross receipts have to go back to a community nonprofit. It can be drug prevention, right? It can be Pomona, it's a school of the arts. All kinds of different opportunities for you to do something in a growing industry that's going to continue to grow. And there is a real fight amongst the industry to remove local control. You have local control right now, which plays to your advantage. You get to self-determine what's going to happen in your city. Take advantage of the opportunity, right? The 300-page ordinance is cumbersome. There's a lot of detail in there. Most of them are 60 to 80, right? It's 300 pages is a lot. It's a lot of detail to go through. Our union, we talked about weed maps earlier, it was mentioned earlier, was the UFCW that fought to make sure that every illegal operator was removed from weed maps, or they were charged $10,000 a day that listing stayed on the site. The UFCW is the leading advocate in the state of California when it comes to labor to make sure we're raising standards. Delivery drivers. Right now you have delivery drivers who are driving cars that are literally barely roadworthy. Right? Now here in an area like this, okay, just pick up the phone, call AAA. You get to more rural areas, you've got nowhere to go. What does the driver do? Is he supposed to take out all the cash he has with him in a bucket with up to $10,000 worth of product and walk down the street to the nearest gas station? The UFCW is working to make sure that vehicles are roadworthy, that the drivers had an adequate amount of car insurance in case they get in an accident, right? That the companies are making sure that they're insured in case they're robbed or the driver is harmed by somebody. So I would love to work with the city and your staff to come up with something that would be very unique. I just think the UFCW is a really good advocate. Yes, you have staff here, and they've gone around and visited things and looked at different stores. If you haven't, I would encourage you to. You have two wonderful stores right next door, Catalyst and Steezy, right? Average customer spends about $50 per visit, and they're in the store for 10 to 15 minutes. You're not getting that kind of customer spending anywhere else. So, Mark Ramos, UFCW Local 1428, would love to sit down and meet with you all and just have a conversation about what you can do in a very unique opportunity to benefit your community in ways you probably never even thought possible. You may ever not get the opportunity to do again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public? Okay, hearing none. Any last comments from the council?
I do. Real quickly, Mr. Ramos, did you say Steezy?
3 eyes.
So S-T-I-I-I?
C-Y.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, do you want
Councilmember
to?
Martinez, you have your light on.
Just a quick comment, two actually. Thank you for the report. What I appreciate most is the context. You know, you see the numbers of support declining, but it makes sense that in the context of our economy and the struggles that we're dealing with, that those numbers will be declining. So it's interesting to see that. But my other comment is that it's going to be very important for us to consider facts and statistics. And we have to be careful as a council not to compare our city to other cities, but rather consider statistics as a whole, because we are not Los Angeles and we have a very different demographic, and we don't want to scare our residents away from voting on this issue that could be very beneficial for our city, because we're using one or two examples of something that happened somewhere else. So I would just hope that maybe we can flush out these facts and statistics maybe at the next meeting that we have, rather than, bringing up issues that only we know and the other council members have not had an opportunity to take a look at. Thank you.
Thank you. There appear to be no other questions. I would then adjourn the workshop at, what time is it? 6:50 p.m. Thank you.